titles. But don't be distracted by the bright lights and the innovative main title. There's something ironic here, a reason for setting this display on the waterfront. In a second or two, we will see why. I'm Bob Gilpin, and I've been teaching My Man Godfrey as history for many years. I'm going to talk with you about this film, a film that barely conceals its complexity behind the easy genre labels of screwball and romantic comedy, a film that manages to overcome its inclusion in the production line studio system that turned out films like Hotcakes or today's Big Macs. Godfrey juxtaposes two worlds, the glamorous world of the rich and that inhabited by a much larger number of people, the grim world of Depression America. Yes, My Man Godfrey is a screwball comedy. It also is a film that touches on the desperate lives of the 10 million Americans still out of work in 1936. Many lived in shanty towns, some built on city dumps, just like this Hooverville. That name, evoking the 31st President of the United States, ridicules his attempts to stem the Depression. The time in which Godfrey is set is indeterminate, but we can rest assured that the Depression is still in full swing, as the following exchange will indicate.
Hello, Duke. Well, Mike, any luck today?
Well, I figured out a swell racket, and everything was going great until the cops came along.
Too bad it didn't work.
If them cops would stick to their own racket and leave honest guys alone, we'd get somewhere in this country without a lot of this relief and all that stuff.
Well, Mike, I wouldn't worry. Prosperity's just around the corner.
Yeah, it's been there a long time. I wish I knew which corner. Well, Duke, I'm going to turn in. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir, Mike.
I would ask you to remember those bonsoirs as we go on through this film. Now, here come the swells, dressed in their evening finery, tuxedos, satin gowns. La Cava has just presented us with a neat comparison between that paraphrase of Herbert Hoover's famous line and the real evidence of prosperity, the idle rich. As Screwballs played with the expectations of the audience, with conceptions of role and status, they also featured the motif of the downfall of pride, the readjustment of skewed values. Characters get taken down a peg or two or three in Screwballs, from Frank Capra's treatment of Ellie Andrews in It Happened One Night, to, with equal treatment for both genders, Cary Grant in Howard Hawks' His Girl Friday. But as Godfrey Smith, as we'll come to know him, dumps the arrogant Cornelia in an ash pile, he actually makes a statement not only in Screwball fame, but also a gesture for the forgotten. Godfrey doesn't actually touch Cornelia in this sequence, but he makes a point that will echo throughout this film.
Don't you touch me.
No matter what my board of directors advise, I think you should be spanked.
George, do something.
You in the habit of hitting ladies?
Maybe.
Next, La Cava provides the audience with a ready-made explanation of the forgotten man, underscoring it for audiences then and defining it for us today. He does this in two ways. Visually, by showing us in an almost ghostly appearance the other forgotten men, and then he underscores that visual perception by giving us a characterization out of Irene Bullock's mouth, for it is Irene that we see on screen at this moment. When asked to define what a scavenger hunt is, she says, well, you know, it's when you look for something or someone nobody wants. Society's rejects, the anachronisms of a system gone haywire. Godfrey's demeaning of Cornelia Bullock, the older sister, was a deeply satisfying gesture made by a forgotten man. Perhaps a gesture for the community of forgotten men in this filmic Hooverville, which, by the way, seems to have no women in it, certainly not historically accurate, but dramatically apropos.
In a scavenger hunt, you try to find something that nobody wants.
Like a forgotten man.
That's right, and the one that wins gets a prize, only there really isn't a prize.
La Cava also helps us to believe in what will happen in this film during this interchange between Lombard and Powell, because he allows the camera to explore her radiance his attention to it, and the chemistry between the two actors. Powell had been instrumental in connecting Lombard to My Man Godfrey. Powell had been married to Lombard briefly a few years before. They were still close friends. And Powell was anxious to see her in this role, a choice to which La Cava eagerly assented, preferring her to Constance Bennett, who had been rumored for the role. This exchange shows the wisdom of his decision. La Cava also forwards the plot here. Irene surely is a screwball, as her stream of consciousness conversational style clearly indicates to the audience. At the same time, Powell, as Godfrey, is fascinated by Irene. Thus we hear him agree to be her forgotten man.
Let's beat Cornelia.
He wouldn't be asking too much?
See, I've got a sense of curiosity, just the same as you have. I'd really like to see just what a scavenger hunt looks like.
But I told you.
Yes, I'm still curious.
Step 1. Screwball beguiles rational man.
Thank you.
A moment later, La Cava illumines another quality of the screwball convention. We find Irene and Cornelia's father, the long-suffering Mr. Alexander Bullock, played by Eugene Pallette, speaking with another guest back at the hotel. To the comment, "This place resembles an insane asylum," he notes, "All you need to have an insane asylum is an empty room with the right people in it." As if ushered in by that comment, La Cava then shows us in this hotel sequence the other side of New York, and by inference of Depression America. Here we have the feckless rich at play, the right people in this empty room. Typifying this group is none other than Angelica Bullock, Alexander's wife, whose dithering manner again evokes the screwball theme. La Cava uses the camera now to elaborate on a familiar leitmotif of the screwball comedy, as of its slapstick ancestors: pandemonium, the detritus of the scavengers, with goldfish bowls, girdles, and goats, and always some little man trying to control the unruly crowd. Here, the familiar comedic figure Franklin Pangborn. Now that we have begun in earnest, please consider that you are watching a document from the past. Like any motion picture, Godfrey is an historical artifact, and an artifact made almost 7 decades ago. Godfrey was a box office smash in 1936. Why? What did audiences see here that made them willing to part with their Depression nickels and dimes? Why did their collective response lead to the multiple nominations this film received in 1936? We should note that 1936 was a very good year for film, and for William Powell, who actually was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Actor for his work in the films Great Ziegfeld as well as My Man Godfrey, and who won the award not for this film, but for his work in Ziegfeld. Godfrey was a hit then and is remarkable now, and I would argue perhaps more than the Great Ziegfeld, because of the connections it makes between the world outside the theater and the fantastic world of the screwball comedy. Certainly the film's popularity didn't come from Americans' identification with this giddy crowd that, apropos of the genre, gives off the simultaneous aura of wealth and absurdity. In fact, the crowd's deliriousness is such that Mr. Bullock, also a rational man, is helpless to withstand it. He even calls himself a forgotten man. If you want a forgotten man, I'll be home in bed. Then, as with the opening visuals, La Cava interweaves the reality we just saw at the city dump with the comical spectacle of the scavenger hunt. As Irene enters with Godfrey in tow, we are made to see how fitting the contrast of Godfrey's appearance against the formally and elaborately dressed crowd. This effect, a kind of topsy-turvydom as it's called by film historian Wes Gehring, is achieved here not only by visual contrast, but more significantly by Godfrey's comments and by his real sense of aplomb. In short, by dialogue and action, critical elements in a screwball comedy. Godfrey's real beard, his physical address, juxtaposing Sutton Place with a city dump, his rueful comment when asked if he was wanted by the police, "Nobody wants me, I'm a forgotten man." Most assuredly, Godfrey is out of place in this room of the right people. But his evident bemusement isn't meant to be the product of his inferiority. Rather, Godfrey is bemused by the absurdity of his surroundings. So would audiences in theaters in 1936 be struck by such absurdity. Oh yes, the wacky rich are a screwball comedy characteristic. Indeed, there is no more absurd moment than when the MC asks to validate Godfrey's stubble. This entire scene creates a marvelous moment for La Cava. He frames Godfrey with Franklin Pangborn and then surrounds them with the top-hatted and begowned socialites. Godfrey is in the foreground, making this mise en scène a contrast not only of costume, but of position. In a very real way, Godfrey will remain in that position throughout this film. Then, his words underscore this visual presentation as he remarks why he came to the hall.
My purpose in coming here tonight was twofold. Firstly, I wanted to aid this young lady. Secondly, I was curious to see how a bunch of empty-headed nitwits conducted themselves. My curiosity is satisfied. I assure you it'll be a pleasure for me to go back to a society of really important people.
Remember the men who showed up in the background earlier? With that shot, La Cava established their sense of community, these men without a purpose relevant to society and hence forgotten. But they are good and even educated men. Now we see the bonsoirs earlier have a relevance. 30s audiences would have no trouble picking out with whom they would rather spend time. The real people down on their luck, the so-called forgotten men, or the knobs, bickering, feckless, and more than a little crazy. In the next few minutes, however, La Cava initiates one of the elements that will justify those nickels and dimes, and it's not a screwball characteristic. Listen to Irene. You've done something for me. I wish I could do something for you because you've done something for me, don't you see? And then, can you buttle? In a rather inane way, Irene Bullock here establishes one of the major themes of this film, obligation and responsibility. We will return to it again and again as the story unfolds. But before we can begin to understand how that motif gives an unusual dimension to My Man Godfrey, we have to observe La Cava establishing, in the rest of this scene, the more traditionally screwball elements of this film. He has developed his principal characters, beautiful shrew with crazy little sister, ditzy mom, angry father, and Godfrey going along for the ride. So far, this arrangement meets the requirements of the screwball genre, as well as fitting into the other requirements, those of that seemingly endless stream of formulaic films turned out by the studio system of 30s Hollywood. As this scene winds to an end, into it also is introduced the actively vengeful Cornelia, establishing not just a romance, but the requisite romantic triangle. While the audience can see the chemistry that makes the relationship between Godfrey and Irene believable, that chemistry is just a bonus at this point in the film, since the romantic comedy is to be expected. Finally, in this scene are encapsulated the elements of the screwball comedy, the conventions that the audience expects. Mismatched couple, crazy action, crisis, resolution. We have romance, as La Cava frames Irene and Godfrey in what is called an American two-shot. Especially in the dump and then in the hotel, the shots give us the chemistry of the two characters. Then, in these last few seconds of this scene, La Cava begins to play with that formula. As you watch these seconds and the scenes that follow, keep your eyes peeled for times when you might wonder whether the actors are acting or just being themselves. It was La Cava's particular gift to lead his actors to relax from play acting to being. Could that business with a hole in Godfrey's pocket have been unexpected? Watch carefully. Godfrey, as butler, begins with his entrance into the kitchen. Note the camera as observer. Had it entered with Godfrey, it would see what he does. Instead, we observe him setting up future observations for their comic value. Just as novelists cue their readers with combinations of words, so do filmmakers give us visual cues. Films are built from series of shots, combined into scenes and then collections of scenes or sequences. From the moment of Godfrey's entrance to his departure from the kitchen is one scene. Here it's the contrast of the savvy Molly with the betagged Godfrey. And each scene, as in a work of literature, makes points, advances ideas. Godfrey begins this scene a bit unsettled. He has to remove the rental tag from his trick suit, a phrase, by the way, which refers to get-ups which are often easily removed, not exactly accurate in this case, but one that suggests artificiality. But as he is also to do so often in this film, Godfrey quickly redresses the balance and informs the audience by adding a counter-irritant to remove the pixies he hears about. Godfrey has dignity as bum and as butler. Why? He clearly is educated. Is that a comment on the forgotten man? Now, as he adds the counter-irritant, we see Powell playing himself as well as Godfrey. He is a known star, and audiences expect him to be debonair, gentlemanly, and wise. We must always understand what 30s audiences expect.
Where do I find her?
You better go this way. It's quicker. The upper landing to the left.
Now he sets off to deal with the battle axe, as she is referred to by Molly, Mrs. Bullock, who, by the way, was in real life as Alice Brady, a few months younger than Powell himself. Note the way the camera follows Powell as Godfrey into the bedroom. And then note where it is. Does it go through the door with him? Or is it in fact in one moment in the room, as you see, scanning the situation as it pans across the room and observing? Why is this? Because when Godfrey enters Angelica Bullock's bedroom, he must solve a problem, the pixies. Once again, we observe Mrs. Bullock, who is as at sea in the world in the morning as she had been the night before. Last night, she was mystified by the term bucks. What are bucks? Nothing more than a demonstration of her world, no bigger than a grape. This morning, she is bothered, as apparently every morning, by pixies. We need to remember that films make great use of synecdoche, the part standing in for the whole. If an illustration is a posit, then we can empathize with the idea. Here, the idea is that Godfrey actually is a good butler. The model comes from James Barrie's play, The Admirable Crichton. Crichton was the perfect butler. And just observe Godfrey. Now, in the case of the pixies, Godfrey's solution isn't remarkable, but the aplomb with which he accomplishes it bodes well for his butlerdom. He also manages to remind Mrs. B that he is the forgotten man of the previous evening. How effective a simple shave can be.
Yes, but you mustn't step on them. I don't like them.
The dialogue here, echoed briefly in Irene's room later on, also comments on the anonymity of those who serve. Godfrey, in his trick suit, appears to be just another butler to Mrs. Bullock, and so to Irene momentarily. This is a comment on the anonymity of the retail clerk, the uniformed doorman, and of course, in this case, the personal servant, the butler or valet. There's no question that La Cava is underscoring here the issue of the division between those who serve and those who are served, cloaking it, as always, in the guise of the screwball comedy.
You might go away, too.
Godfrey is not going to be quite so successful when dealing with his second client, Cornelia. And by the way, I often wonder as I watch this scene just exactly where Mr. Bullock sleeps. There are either a profusion of rooms or not very many at all in this house, but obviously that's left up to our imagination. In any case, after his rebuff by Cornelia, Irene demands breakfast, and it's important to see the line here that Molly draws in her description of Cornelia as lioness, and then of Irene. Well, she's not so violent, says Molly, but more insidious. An interesting description, and one which we'll hear an echo of later on.
Get out! I don't want hobo serving my breakfast. Don't ever come near again if you know what's good for you.
Afraid I lost the second round.
Hey, Molly, come on over and bring me some breakfast.
Opportunity never stops knocking in this house. Do you want to try again?
Well, how is she in the morning?
She's not as violent, but she's more insidious.
Here goes.
I'll leave your things right up here so you won't forget them.
I also want you to watch what happens with the camera in the second entrance into a bedroom, because here the camera enters with Godfrey and sees the scene as he does over his shoulder, rather than being in a position to survey his actions. The reason for this, I would argue, is that Godfrey in Irene's bedroom is unmanned, ill at ease, not in control of the situation. It is no surprise to us that the camera feasts on Carole Lombard in this scene. Here she is at her most beautiful, and she is every bit the star we know her to be, the glowing female distaff half of one of Hollywood's most famous couples, Gail and Lombard. But it might have been a surprise to audiences in 1936, who had seen Carole Lombard, but never in a role as triumphant as that of Irene Bullock. She had managed to get this role partly because of Powell's intervention, as I noted earlier, and partly because she belied her age — Lombard was 28 when this film was made — by her friendships with the VIPs of Hollywood. She was also, as the writer-director Garson Kanin described her, an on-the-level woman. She connected with you, he said. Here, she's connecting with Godfrey, leaving him again a bit bedazzled in the process. That bemusement could also be the product of the topic of discussion, a double entendre as motif that runs through this film. Godfrey, Irene informs him, is to be her protege. Carlo, whom we'll meet in a more thorough manner presently, is her mother's protege. So Irene feels it only appropriate to have one also. But just exactly what one does with a protege is unclear to her, as it is to Godfrey. These details, however, are quickly submerged in Irene's conversational style. But one statement does stand out, as Irene skips through the conversation, leaving Godfrey becalmed several sentences back. "You're my responsibility," she notes, and then, as Godfrey takes his exit, she ends with the most prescient line of all, however misleading.
Pretty nice.
See you in church.
The remainder of this sequence, or series of scenes, brings us back to the Screwball formula, underscoring the insanity of the family and Alexander Bullock's, father's, futile attempts to maintain order. He describes himself as the old-fashioned type. Whether it's by thrashing Godfrey, whom he mistakes in this scene for Irene's lover, or paying off the process server and dealing with the horse in the library.
Well, you see, sir, I'm the new butler. I just served Mr.
Note how many venues have been visited by the camera thus far. We have seen the dump, the hotel, and possibly 3 sets, the kitchen, the front hall and stairs, and the bedrooms. In a moment we will see the drawing room, or as it is occasionally called in this film, the living room. My Man Godfrey could be a stage play. There are no scenes that require an expansive space in which action could develop. Rather, our attention is held by the actors and by what they say. For example, La Cava manages to keep the pot boiling here on the Cornelia front, because as we return to the drawing room, we will find that Cornelia and Godfrey have yet another set to. This will mark their third confrontation. And as you think about that when developing, you need to keep in your mind the picture of Cornelia and Godfrey eyeing each other in the lobby of the hotel from the previous evening. As with every moment in a film, that visual moment was meant to give us something to think about. And we're now going to see how that action plays itself out in the following scene. Again, we are into convention. As any seasoned audience of the 1930s would realize here, this manipulative young woman, Cornelia Bullock, likely will get Godfrey. She will realize her purpose. She will punish him. And the likelihood of his being arrested, beaten up, or forgotten again is ever present. Note that he has already avoided being arrested and being beaten up. Because Godfrey is a screwball comedy, there will be continued topsy-turvydom. So it is worth considering whose roles are likely to be reversed. Also, since this genre produces reconciliations, the combination of opposites, might Cornelia actually end up with Godfrey? Observe the conversation between Cornelia and Godfrey. Here we see another familiar device of the classic cinema, the eyeline match. As we look in close-up at one or the other speaker, in classic films we travel back and forth from one to the other along a line that connects them from eye to eye. The half circumference so inscribed is precisely the area in which the camera can travel. What we also should consider here are the cues of the camera. Now there is a perfect eyeline match shooting over her left shoulder to observe Godfrey, and now we go to the other side. But notice also how the camera in that scene lingers on Cornelia. Are we being misled? She surely is mean enough to warrant rehabilitation. Also, Godfrey, we've been told, is Irene's protege, and we're quickly to be made aware of what that means. In the dialogue that follows between Irene and Cornelia, substance is less than tone. It's probably a good thing, because much of what the two sisters actually say to one another here, while it has echoes later on, is simply balderdash.
Since when did you start falling in love with butlers?
I'm not in love with him. He's my protege.
Oh, your protege. That's why you're picking out his suits.
Rather, what is happening here has mostly to do with establishing the characters of the two sisters. Recall that we have seen them together twice before, and then only briefly. In the first scene, Cornelia, played by Gail Patrick, was displaced by Godfrey, leaving the field, therefore Godfrey, to Irene. In the second scene, in the hotel lobby, Cornelia had thrown the gauntlet, acting as she would through the film, true to type. She is the perfect entitled brat, the typical victim of the screwball role reversal. But what is Carole Lombard's role here to be? Comic foil, or leading lady, or both? That was hers and La Cava's to decide, because she had not been cast in a leading role before Godfrey. We interrupt that speculation with the entry of the other protege. As played by Mischa Auer, Carlo is a European of indeterminate origin. There's no identification made. It's worth remembering that Auer, like Brady, Powell, and Lombard, were all nominees for Academy Awards for this film, the first ever to receive 4 acting nominations.
Don't bother about me. I feel like one of the family.
In fact, it garnered 7 nominations in all, but no awards. Later we can speculate on why. What Carlo isn't is talented, except in histrionics and a mimicry of a certain sort, as we'll soon see. What he poses as is an intellectual. As he says in this instant, "Oh, money, 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 the Frankenstein monster that destroys souls," says Carlo, as Mr. Bullock is engaging in a tirade over the family's profligacy. "You mistake me for the treasury," he notes.
Money, money, money. The Frankenstein monster that destroys souls.
Please don't say anything more about it.
What is really interesting here is Alexander Bullock's exchange with Angelica as Carlo goes off moaning about money, and Angelica berates Alexander.
You're inebriated. You don't know what you're talking about.
Well, who would know what they're talking about living with a bunch like this? There's one thing I do know. What this family needs is discipline.
What is he talking about? Well, it's not absolutely clear. If Carlo is betting Angelica, only the censors know. You see, after 1934, with the creation of the Hays office, Hollywood was held to a standard that made any innuendo, not to mention any explicit reference to sex, absolutely forbidden. Certainly, Alexander Bullock is one of the most forgotten men, it would seem. Here, he momentarily asserts himself, only to be defeated by his own and the Hays office's inability to articulate the situation, and then by Angelica's haughty response. Alexander, you're inebriated. You don't know what you're talking about.
Will you stop bellowing? Look what you're doing to Carlo.
Hang Carlo!
Audiences in the 30s certainly would have known and would have howled. Now another screwball moment. From the demands for discipline by Mr. B to Angelica's denial of any part in riding the horse into the library. I couldn't have been riding last night. I wasn't wearing my riding costume. The rapid-fire patter, again a hallmark of the screwball routine, goes on as Godfrey enters with canapes. Here, as he had done in the dump and in the hotel, La Cava turns to a long shot with deep focus so the audience can see action taking place on 3 levels in the drawing room. We see Godfrey serving hors d'oeuvres to Cornelia, who asks which one are poison, cueing her theme in this sequence. We see Alexander and Angelica Bullock discussing how much money he has lost, which Angelica suggests he might have left in his other suit. And finally, we see Carlo, who is draped dramatically on the doors of the bar and who springs from his miasma at the mere mention of food. His fondness for food, by the way, suggests another motif of the screwball comedy, the venal character. But this scene has another purpose. Yes, it provides exposition, Mr. Bullock's declining fortune, who Carlo is, more on Cornelia's campaign against Godfrey. It also identifies groups of interest, the triangle of Irene, Godfrey, and Cornelia, the elder Bullocks, and Carlo. Finally, it advances Irene's connection with Godfrey. As Cornelia launches her invective of innuendo and Irene collapses in tears, we quickly learn that Irene is prone to breakdowns, that Godfrey, the butler, her protege, has replaced Irene's now dead Pomeranian, and that irrelevant to Irene's hysteria, but certainly providing one of the most famous comic moments in any 30s comedy, that Carlo can do a marvelous imitation of a gorilla, complete with swinging from the ceiling and picking the Maltese.
Let's get out of here. Carlo, do the gorilla for Irene. It always amuses her.
Not in the mood.
It's worthy of note that this imitation of a gorilla does not come from one of the insane rich, but actually from a protege. But it is a marvelous moment and one we should certainly watch.
Go ahead. Come on, Carlo, quickly. Look, Irene, look at Carlo. Isn't that lovely? Oh, isn't that clever, Irene? Look. Carlo, come down there where she can see you better. This is another laugh. Isn't he clever? Carlo, come down here where Irene can see you. Look at another laugh. Look. Look, is that funny? Oh, he's going to swing on the door. Look.
Let me underscore for you the absurdity of this scene. This, after all, is the protege artist, devotee of great literature and great music, whose most accomplished moment is imitating a gorilla, leading, of course, to Mr. Bullock's response to this show by saying,
Why don't you stop imitating a gorilla and imitate a man?
You wouldn't know an artist if one came up and bit you.
This family doesn't need...
and then Mrs. Bullock's response, in perfect screwball fashion, you wouldn't know an artist if one came up and bit you. This is as classic Screwball as the final gesture from Mr. Bullock when he declared that the family doesn't need any more stimulation, takes the entire tray of cocktails, and tells Godfrey to bring more of the same in 30 minutes. "Someday I'm going gorilla hunting and I won't miss," he says as he departs. So this entire scene has played perfectly as a Screwball comedy. What we need not to miss, however, is the purpose of the scene in a greater context. Because here's Irene, now holding Godfrey's hand and in fact manipulating the family in order to put the possibility of Godfrey's being fired aside. Not only does she succeed in doing that by removing the rest of the members of the family, she also kisses Godfrey. Unmanned again, suffering another reversal of roles, and in Godfrey's mind a total violation of status and rank. He doesn't know what to do.
Hey, Cook, you better put this back on the fire. Looks like we've lost most of our customers.
It's interesting that both Molly, here, noticing Godfrey's rouge-covered lips, and Irene certainly do know what to do. Cynical Molly wryly observes the scene. Lovesick Irene, having brought Godfrey along from protege, and what is it that that term actually means? That's another motif of this film. To would-be lover is now going after him. Godfrey is having none of it, and he's also nonplussed again. He clearly is a man who observes proprieties, a comment on his real values.
Besides, I want to talk.
In this scene, for example, he asks Irene whether her mother ever told her that some things were proper and some were not. "No, she hasn't," says Irene. "She rambles on quite a bit, but then she never says anything." Mrs. B, of course, is ever concerned with proprieties. From the anxiety she showed in the hotel about her daughter's outburst, "Oh, Irene always shouts when she wins," to her reaction to hiring Godfrey, "Oh, just go along, my good man, thank you very much," to finally her reaction to Mr. B's blustering, "Oh, you're upsetting Carlo." All of this value business, of course, is also a clue to Godfrey's own approach to life and to his background, about which, of course, we know nothing at the moment. This scene also manages to advance the business of the plot in another way. Because Godfrey is able, finally, to banish Irene from his room and, in theory, from his non-butler life, because, we might argue, he is put off by the comparison of his serving as protege to the affection Irene had for her deceased Pomeranian, that relationship apparently goes into some jeopardy.
Undid all the fine work she had done.
Is it someone you know?
Her name is Irene Bullock. Now, if she were a smart little girl, she'd pick out some nice young chap on her own social set.
The plot, of course, is that unfolding of events that we actually see, along with the inferences we can make about what is happening that we don't see. For example, the Bullocks all got out of bed the morning Godfrey attended them. We didn't see it, but we know it happened. The plot, however, is distinct from the story, which here includes events and ideas we infer. For example, we know the Depression is going on. I referred to it early on because it marks the time and is important to an understanding of the film. But it's never mentioned here. The other issue of story here is that sex is never mentioned. We know it exists. In fact, it probably existed between Cornelia and that crazy college boy Irene refers to with "ya, ya, ya." It's part of the environment in which the plot moves. But the story contains material we never hear or see, i.e. the Depression.
Nobody seems to know the words. Except perhaps Godfrey. He seems to know everything. Do you know the words?
I hope, by the way, that you noticed Mrs. Bullock as this scene opened. In repose, she actually looks her age and is quite beautiful, free of the agitation which makes her seem far older, i.e. the Depression.
My ancestors came over on a boat. Oh, not the Mayflower, but the boat after that. What did your ancestors come over on, Godfrey?
As we enter one of the pivotal scenes of My Man Godfrey, the scene in which Godfrey's past will begin to come to light and thus seem to provide the ever-vigilant Cornelia with the first instrument of her revenge. We need to consider how masterful is Carole Lombard's performance throughout this scene, how she manages here, as a few minutes earlier, to manipulate those around her without using the arrogant manner employed by her sister. Further, this tea party also serves as another illustration of the context of the life of the rich. As one critic maintained, the rich can do anything, because how many in the movie audience who were getting their free dishes and playing bingo in the theaters knew what the rich were doing? Here, what they were doing is best described as happy pandemonium. Euphemistically, a tea party. Compare its hubbub to the scavenger hunt, and realize that Godfrey is the one figure who can preserve his dignity within this disorder, at least until the accidental arrival of Tommy Gray.
Do you know any good funeral music, Carlo? Shut up.
As we listen to that scene and its screwball consequences, we must realize that we are seeing yet another characteristic of the screwball comedy here, the improbable and the incongruous made real.
Am I spoiling your act, dear?
I'll spoil something of yours someday, and it won't be your act.
Do you suppose Miss Irene would like sandwiches served in here, or shall I create a sort of buffet?
Where do you want the sandwiches served, Irene?
In fact, we could claim, as we watch the scene that will open in just a moment, that La Cava has introduced a deus ex machina into this plot to advance it. But in fact, it may not be quite that improbable. Remember, what we have here is a person of uncertain origin, Godfrey Smith. We know nothing about him except that he was extant on a city dump as this film opened. And a very wealthy family, the Bullocks, living at 1011 Fifth Avenue and living the life of the upper crust in New York City.
Hi, Irene. Why the shroud?
Listen, Van Rumpel, just because some people have $1 million doesn't mean they can put their arms around other people.
And we have Godfrey, the calm island in the midst of the comparative anarchy that is this tea party, or probably more properly cocktail party, with the same cast of characters that we had seen at the beginning of this film at the scavenger hunt in the hotel.
No, thank you.
Now enters the deus ex machina in the form of Tommy Gray. While this certainly unsettles Godfrey, who clearly recognizes the voice he hears over his shoulder, we must question exactly what this means to us. Is this just a piece of business that seems utterly implausible, or are there reasons why Tommy Gray's entrance in this setting is both reasonable and the developments that are about to ensue also make perfect sense?
It's your play. Well, come around here. Mr. Gray's not an acrobat. Let us come over you.
I would argue that the latter is more probably the case for a couple of reasons. First of all, we are dealing with a family of, there are no aristocrats in the United States, so let's simply say of the very rich. People who winter in certain places and summer in certain places, and whether they live in Boston, Philadelphia, New York, even Washington, D.C., the likelihood is that they associate with one another. Therefore, Tommy Gray's clearly intimate relationship with the members of the Bullock family, whom he addresses quite casually by their first names, and therefore, as we are discovering at this moment, also his relationship with Godfrey Smith, with whom he attended Harvard. Obviously, finding Godfrey as a butler in the house of friends is a bit bizarre, and he seeks an explanation. That is perfectly reasonable. The way that that explanation becomes elaborated, with all of its fateful consequences, is simply the kind of implausible development that anyone faced with elaborating a story on the spot might just come up with. It's stretched out, but so is the situation, and so are the tensions created primarily by Cornelia on the one hand, and interestingly enough here, by Angelica, who's quite anxious to push this story to its limit. She pays attention far better in this circumstance than she will in a few moments when she addresses her husband. We should also note the attentiveness with which the crowd listens to what Tommy Gray is saying. Obviously, they don't consider this story implausible for the simple reason that they're used to dealing with a servant problem, as Cornelia aptly describes the situation themselves.
I said that Godfrey was still very polite.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Bullock. It's a pleasure to have you say so publicly.
That's my nature, Godfrey. I never say anything behind your back that I won't say in public.
Now, that's what I admire about you, Angelica.
That's nice of you, Tommy. What about the story?
Well, anyhow, Godfrey came to me and said, I trust my work has been satisfactory, sir. That was about the gist of it, wasn't it, Godfrey?
Those may not have been my exact words, sir, but that was about the gist of it.
All right, we'll settle for that. You said he was very satisfactory, and then he said thank you, and then what?
Naturally, I had to take an attitude.
You don't make sense. What kind of an attitude?
Irene is bemused, but she also has no idea what is going to happen next.
5 children.
5.
My. Was his wife an Indian woman?
I believe she was rather dark. We used to take her on hunting trips to stalk the game.
Godfrey, why did
Now, that particular absurdity aside, obviously this story has now thrown the ultimate wrench into the developing relationship, in Irene's mind at least, between her and Godfrey. You will notice, however, that Godfrey, quite aware of this situation, had glanced over rather warily at Irene. What this sequence finally is able to demonstrate is just exactly how much Irene still has to grow up. She is every bit the impulsive child here, fitting the description Godfrey gave of her to her a few moments before in his room. Once there was a very sentimental little girl with a very good heart, and she helped a man who was very grateful, but then she became a nuisance. If she knows what's good for her, she'll pick out a nice young man from her own social set and marry him. In other words, Godfrey does not believe that Irene should marry him. He is the person most insistent about roles and social order. And so the abandon that had led Irene to kiss Godfrey, now in this sequence, leads her to announce her engagement to Charlie Van Rumpel, whose fatuous qualities and lack of perceptiveness would make him an ideal member of the crazy Bullock family. Once again, La Cava has advanced the plot, given us a few more evidences of screwballdom, and also tossed a few clues out about who Godfrey is so that the audience can think about them as the action continues. It would seem that the mystery is about to be unraveled, and we certainly cannot understand, even from the Harvard remark, why Godfrey is such a well-spoken butler. If Tommy Gray's story still may seem a bit implausible to modern audiences, keep in mind 2 things. First of all, the audience is involved in this story, and they expect implausibility from screwball comedies. Secondly, Gregory La Cava liked to improvise, and this scene smacks much too much of real life. So I guess it does work here, without question.
I don't know why, but they just do. Irene is so peculiar. She shouts when she wins and cries when she...
Naturally, La Cava could have changed it, edited it, because this film did not follow the script religiously. In fact, Eric Hatch, one of the co-authors, has been quoted as remarking that several things weren't in his book, weren't in the script, but certainly were in the movie. Because we know that La Cava, first of all, provoked his actors to perform as they might have lived in real life. Because we know that he, as the phrase goes, edited in the can, meaning that he did very little editing once a scene was shot, since he had rehearsed and drawn out his actors. It is quite reasonable to believe that what we see on the screen may have existed nowhere before the scene was actually committed to film. Now we have a scene that provides some foreshadowing, some indication of future direction, that has its laughs, but also that evokes the persistent undertone of this film. As we listen to the interchange between Mr. Bullock and Godfrey, we need to keep in mind the more complex issues of the times, with those key words for this film, dump and forgotten and responsibility. Who is responsible for whom? Let's listen.
No, thank you. Godfrey, you seem to be a pretty good sort. Have you noticed anything queer about me lately?
Nothing particularly, sir.
I sometimes wonder whether my whole family's gone mad or whether it's me.
I know just how you feel, sir. I've felt that way many times since I've been here.
Then why do you stay here? I have to. You don't.
It's much more comfortable than living in a packing box on a city dump, sir. Besides, I'm rather proud of my job here.
You're proud of being a butler?
I'm proud of being a good butler, sir. And
Again the dump, again nobody, and some mystery. Who is Godfrey, after all?
Say, who are you?
I'm just a nobody, sir. Coffee?
That mystery is about to be answered as Godfrey meets Tommy for a drink. Beyond the repartee, we gather first that Booze and Godfrey might be old friends. He disdains a drink for lemonade, which he can either take or leave alone. That Godfrey actually is a Boston blue blood who felt sorry for himself because of an unfortunate romance, but also because, as he has since learned, the Park family didn't know how to face life. We were puppets for 10 generations. And it's worth noting the word puppet in that statement. Puppets to what? Who's the puppeteer? What's being controlled here? Then, as Godfrey notes, he was saved by encountering a bunch of people on the city dump who were fighting for life. Tommy, rich man, pampered rich man, in fact, of course thinks Godfrey is crazy. Not so Cornelia, who alone among her family managed to glean from the scene in the drawing room between Tommy and Godfrey, as they whispered to one another, sotto voce, where Godfrey would be, and has followed him. So the purpose of this scene becomes twofold. A, it allows for exposition. We find out, more than we have known, obviously, through the entire film, about the origins of one Godfrey Smith. Secondly, we're going to find out something else, and that is the relationship, at least as both parties see it, between Cornelia and Godfrey. Because Cornelia obviously has had designs on Godfrey since the opening moment. Not that moment when she was pushed into the ash pile, but certainly by the time she sees him in the hotel, and now we observe her looking at him again, we know that there is something else happening here, and we're about to learn what.
When you get him on the wire, keep him there.
What's this all about?
Don't ask too many questions.
Okay.
What Cornelia wants, as the femme fatale of this film, what she has wanted from Godfrey all along, was to seduce him, to have him under her thrall. Wiping her shoe wasn't enough. Cornelia wants something else from Godfrey. She wants to be able to dominate him as she does the young man who's constantly following her around. What La Cava presents us with here, again, is a clash of values. While Godfrey Smith, or as we now know him to be, Godfrey Park, has a very clear set of values: honest, courageous, principled in every respect. Cornelia, thus far in the film, has displayed none of those values. And Godfrey is the butler, and Cornelia the rich young woman, and we're about to elaborate on that in this scene.
You may have said that we used to take long walks in the park, sort of custom.
Oh, yes, I see. Well, if you can be so chummy with the Greys, why can't you be...
Because as Godfrey understands what Cornelia's purpose is in being there, he responds first to that flirtatiousness by noting that he tries to keep his place. Then, when pushed by Cornelia, who wants to hear him say nothing else but how much he likes her, and watch the way the camera develops that from the opening instant we saw her in this cocktail lounge setting. Godfrey is driven to refer to her, to be honest.
You belong to that unfortunate category that I would call the Park Avenue brat. A spoiled child was grown up in ease and luxury, was always had her own way, and whose misdirected energies are so childish that they hardly deserve the comment even of a butler on his off Thursday.
Thank you for a very lovely portrait.
Hiya, Cornelia. What are you doing here?
Godfrey and I were discussing tomorrow's menu.
Well, don't run away.
I'm in an awfully big hurry. Goodbye now. I'll see you down by the ash pile.
I'll see you in the ash pile, she says. More of the revenge motif, obviously, in the offing, and that amusing remark and reference to the opening incident of the film. But that's not a particularly funny scene. It was a scene, however, that featured the action of a principled man, albeit one who now switches to the hard stuff. Now, what follows in this scene, and this is a discrete scene with beginning and end, is the relationship between Molly and Irene. We didn't know they had one, did we? Well, this is an abandonment encouraged by the barrier-breaking quality of love. Irene is in love, so is Molly, both of them with Godfrey. Godfrey's effect on both has been to humanize them. Molly cares even for Irene, whom we should remember she had described as insidious. Irene cares for Molly, even though both love the same man. Why? Because Irene has been given direction by her affection for Godfrey. Perhaps the most amusing moment comes when they both describe him as mean. Substitute proper. At least proper would be the best description until after this touching embrace of the two. As I said, the barrier-breaking quality here. Godfrey returns to the kitchen in his cups, a happy drunk. This scene is worth watching, principally because of Powell's artistry in playing it.
How about a quartet?
For tomorrow may bring sorrow, so tonight let us be gay. Tell the story.
Courage, she said, and pointed toward the land. This mounting wave will roll ashore with soon.
Now La Cava cuts to a rather different moment, one which probably appears here only because he's underscoring once again the pseudo-intellectualism of Carole, reading at this moment from Tennyson's The Lotus Eaters, a poem which is taken in turn from the Odyssey and Ulysses' visit to the land of the Lotus Eaters, where always afternoon reigned and hedonism was the archetype. Now we return to Godfrey as drunken butler. Such a condition is a commonplace, actually, in screwball comedies. The screwball hero often is faced with an accident, a condition, as in drunkenness, or some mishap that befalls him and thus provides the crucial moment in the plot of the film. Witness Clark Gable's car problems in It Happened One Night, or Joel McCrea's being hit on the head in Sullivan's Travels. In Screwballs, the screwballs are the rich. The heroes, or heroines, Roz Russell and his girl Friday, are just regular Joes trying to work out their dilemmas in the face of absurdity. In fact, they are the anti-heroes, not incredibly good at anything except coping. They are always able to cope.
Why can't you do as you're told?
After all, as Robert Sklar, the editor of Movie Made America, maintains in his comments about Screwballs, the point was, in these films, to show how everything always worked out in the end, while the rich simply were being funny, even to the point of insanity sometimes, and always ultimately harmless. Sklar found that screwballs are meant to underscore, even undergird, the status quo. Indeed, there is a considerable body of critical opinion that maintains that screwball comedy is indigenous to the Depression, born of and an antidote to its travail. Certainly this impression would be forwarded by such films as The Awful Truth, or Topper, or Bringing Up Baby. Sometimes when watching these films, it's hard to realize that most of the country is at least cognizant of, if not touched by, the great slump of the 1930s. Remember, And in a minute, we'll see more on this subject. Remember that in the Depression, nothing was certain except the apparently desolate nature of each day for many millions of Americans. Therefore, the argument that screwball comedies were the perfect escape for the rest of the country is a logical one, except, and it's a big exception, except it omits the less conformist, less escapist films of the genre. In addition to Godfrey, such films as George Cukor's Holiday and most of Capra's 30s film, if we allow Capra into this pantheon, and I'll get back to that in 1 second, display far more complexity. Now, a comment on Capra before we go on. I think it's worth noting that the two films that we are most likely to focus on as screwball comedies in the Capra oeuvre are It Happened One Night and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. It is probably more logical, if we consider all the elements, to classify both these movies as problem films or romantic comedies or both. Neither, even if we allow for the somewhat eccentric behavior of Longfellow Deeds, neither has a panoply of insane rich people such as the ones we find in My Man Godfrey.
He's always paying other people compliments.
Darling, why don't you eat something? Look at Carlo. He's had 2 helpings of everything.
Leave her alone. Carlo's eating enough for both of them.
Now, Alexander.
You ought to be strong enough pretty soon to give that concert.
You can't rush genius.
We could give a bang-up concert right now with a knife and fork.
Why do you always pick on Carlo? Why not try someone else for a change?
Now, certainly the perceptive and very screwball Preston Sturgis was aware of the complexity of screwball comedies, because it was precisely its challenge to comedy that he undertook and ultimately rejected in Sullivan's Travels, which is perhaps the ultimate self-referent screwball.
What is it? What's troubling you?
Do you remember the pearl necklace I got?
I would refer particularly to the closing lines of Sullivan's Travels, the Preston Sturgis classic, in which Sullivan announces that he will not make "O Brother, Where Art Thou?" There's a lot to be said for making people laugh. Did you know that it's all some people have? It isn't much, but it's better than nothing in this cockeyed caravan. What all this means for Godfrey is that there's a lot more riding on his success at the Bullocks than we might imagine. As he has already exclaimed on more than one occasion, just avoiding the dump is good. In this sequence, Godfrey also is avoiding jail.
Keep both hands free.
You mean to imply that I'm a criminal?
All I know is that it's an inside job. Who's that?
It's Mother's protege.
No wisecracks. Is that your son?
That? Say, listen, I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I'll be hanged if I'll plead guilty to that.
Stop picking on Carlo.
He wouldn't have time to steal anything. He's always too busy eating.
Luckily for Godfrey, Cornelia is far too transparent in her malevolence. The rich, after all, aren't terribly good at managing the problems of life, and he is too clever for her, as we have already seen.
So you got a passion for jewelry, huh?
In this process, we have watched a sequence that is critical to both ends of this film, because what we are about to see will actually mark the visual conclusion of Godfrey's career as butler, although we certainly don't know that as the scene progresses. The machinery of plot in this sequence creates what we will come to know as essential to the denouement of the story of Godfrey. And as I reminded you earlier, there's a difference here between what is plot and what is story. The other thing that's going to happen in this scene is that we get to observe, and we came in at the beginning of Godfrey's experience as happy drunk in the Bullock household, and now we're going to observe the other end of this.
That's his room over there.
You got him behind him. Here comes the cops. Look out, Godfrey, look out.
Enjoy this thing. All right, lady.
We get to observe Godfrey now both as carefree inebriate and as shrewd observer of the human condition. It's worth noting also that we had a little business, still continuing obviously at this moment, between the police who had arrived on the scene at Cornelia's behest and Molly and then Godfrey.
Do you mind if we
New York's finest, as represented in this scene, are playing the stereotypical roles of police in screwball comedy genre. They are oafish, not terribly bright, and usually terribly officious. In contrast, we have the wise and cynical Molly, who plays against them very effectively, demonstrating her unwillingness to yield to their authority. And I think the authority piece is most important here.
Look under the mattress.
Of course, Godfrey, being inebriated, doesn't have to play that role. He can simply be oblivious to the entire setting, as he proceeds to be through the course of this scene until we get to its end. And at that moment, of course, the entire situation unravels for Cornelia.
Sure they ought to be under the mattress.
Why, I read that that's where people put things when they steal them.
Oh, yeah?
Say, what are you up to? I'd like to talk to you boys outside for just a minute, if you don't mind.
Is Godfrey drunk, or is he merely play acting?
I'm terribly sorry, Godfrey.
No matter. Once again, Cornelia is defeated, and Godfrey avoids another trap. Powell also might not have been just play acting here. Adolphe Menjou tells the story of a memorable bender with La Cava and Powell, in which the former was leading the latter to the character of Godfrey. The next day, a telegram arrived for work instead of Powell. "We may have found Godfrey last night, but we lost Powell. See you tomorrow."
As a matter of fact, I'm not certain that she ever had one.
If you'll remember, I pointed out earlier that screwball comedies, the genre, always present the hero with an obstacle that must be overcome in order to move on, before there can be resolution. Why is it that in this film, Godfrey always manages to be on top of the situation from the beginning? Because it is certainly clear that the largest problem he seems to be presented with is Cornelia's repeated attempts to send him back to the ash pile, or worse, back to jail. The answer is that Godfrey knows better. We're about to understand how he learned. In order to have that lesson brought home, we must visit the place where Godfrey Smith was born, the city dump. First of all, this is the only scene shot on a studio lot. Painted backdrops and all, it's as close as we get to location shooting in this or almost all films of the era. Secondly, there is nothing screwball about this scene, beyond at least the presence of Tommy Gray, the rich man benefactor patsy of Godfrey Smith. Despite Tommy Gray's "I'd rather be in Newport," or what is that distinctive odor, the thrust of this scene is otherwise than screwball. Instead, we are introduced in the course of these few moments to three of Godfrey's friends: Mike, who we met on our first visit to the dump, who is busy washing out his lingerie,
Washing out my lingerie. That's okay.
then Bob, and finally Ballinger, the former head of the Second National, who gave his money to his subscribers, the ultimate act of noblesse oblige. What that translates into for our terms is that when the bank went under, instead of walking away with his personal fortune, he let the people who had put money in his bank take it out again. That statement is a critical element in this scene, that rich can be poor in this topsy-turvy era. What the Depression starts to bring home to all Americans who aren't rich, and to some who had been before 1929, is that there was a long-standing and continuing gulf in America between those who were rich and everyone else. Americans, the everyday Americans, most of us therefore, hadn't realized that even by the release of this film in 1936, less than 10% of the population controlled more than half the nation's wealth. The underlying message of this film is that people who have wealth, whether inherited, the Parks, for example, who have been, quote, puppets for 10 generations, or those who are self-made, presumably Alexander Bullock, have responsibilities to the less fortunate. In a bizarre way, this is precisely the message delivered in his inaugural address in 1933 by the aristocratic 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. As Roosevelt said, confidence thrives only on honesty, honor, and on the sacredness of obligations. What follows is a page from what we might believe to be Vanity Fair or some other fashionable New York society magazine of the period. Its comments about Irene's European trip serves as an entr'acte to signal the passage of time, just as a revolving clock hand or pages peeling off the calendar. One interesting effect not used often in Godfrey is the music that accompanies this scene. It is jaunty, and as the reader gets to the punchline of the article, mocking.
You should be more civil to Carlo.
Why?
I don't mind. As the French say, cherchez la femme.
That will hold you. Carlo always had such a clever answer for everything.
By the way, no one in the film, Cornelia, Irene, Angelica, no one heard that music, just the audience, as opposed to Carlo's piano playing, which obviously was heard both inside the film and by the audience. In the latter case, we call that music diegetic because it takes place inside the film. The music that we have just heard in this scene is an instance of non-diegetic music because it is on the soundtrack but not audible to the actors.
Oh, Godfrey, I was just telling my daughters that you missed them both.
Now let's review where we are in this film, what is about to happen, what has happened, how close we are to realizing the goals of the themes we laid out at the beginning of the film.
There, darling. It's nice to see you cheerful.
Godfrey as screwball comedy. Well, we have seen a number of screwball actions. Have we lived through improbability? Have we lived through incongruity? And are we now approaching resolution? Those are three marks that we need to look for. We also need to look for the existence of a confusing relationship, one that mixes unlikes. And it's not absolutely clear at this moment whether that relationship is going to involve Irene and Godfrey or Cornelia and Godfrey. Perhaps the scene that we're about to see unfold will help explain that.
Well, you better leave it unfinished unless you want to be wearing a lamp for a hat.
Secondly, we have My Man Godfrey as 30s film, and here again we have standard business to be carried out in the course of that film. For example, we have a limited number of sets. Now we're back in the kitchen, one of the original 13 and one which we've seen several times before. And we are concentrating, once again, not on any particular action, but on the appearance and the dialogue between these two actors. Notice once again we are doing this and almost entirely in this scene in what's called an American two-shot, a medium shot, featuring these two characters from the waist up as they carry on their dialogue.
Well, not seriously.
Will you let me do something if I ask you?
What do you want to do?
Wipe.
Oh, all right.
Thirdly, and this is perhaps the most unusual piece of this particular scene, we see another step in the evolution of Irene's character, moving from the ditzy blonde who appeared first on the city dump in the opening scene of the film to someone who's now perfectly happy drying dishes for her butler. I would remind you of the barrier-breaking scene we saw earlier between Molly and Irene. This scene follows directly from that.
Tell me about your trip.
What is important here is that Irene develop dimensionality, that she take on the guise of a real person and not one of the screwball rich. Certainly, Godfrey is rich, or at least he had been in a former persona. We know that. We've understood that by now. But what has to happen in this case, because heroes and heroines in screwball comedies can endure either modest or extreme wealth on one side or the other of the gender curtain. But in this case, they must meet somewhere in the middle. And the problem is not wealth. It is Godfrey's principles and his understanding of how people are supposed to act.
You see, you helped me to
That is why in this scene, he puts Irene off by proposing to her that they simply be friends. Now, that's an enormous step for him. If you'll remember, not too many minutes ago, he had banished Irene from his room, telling her that she had become a nuisance, that this spoiled little girl with a good heart had really gone too far.
But that doesn't mean that we have to fall in love.
Now he's proposing, as he is about to leave his role as butler and emerge as something else, and we're not absolutely sure what. We know he has an idea.
I had a very bitter experience.
Now he is willing to be friends with Irene, but he still holds to the value set that he has been displaying throughout this film. If anything, and we're going to see more on this in a few minutes, Godfrey is a role model for the Bullock household. I think it's also worth noting that William Powell, as leading man, in the recent tradition of perhaps Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, Clark Gable, he is a role model also for the audiences who flock to his films. Now, we should remember that in 1936, Powell stars in 3 films, not 1, and they're all hits, and indeed he receives the Academy Award, not for this movie, although he was nominated for it, but for another film, The Great Ziegfeld. He is a wildly popular star. And what is wildly popular about him, a role that he actually makes famous not in My Man Godfrey, but 2 years earlier in The Thin Man, is the role of gentleman. And I think that word and all of its implications are what we need to remember here.
Oh, well, there couldn't have been 5 children.
Well, naturally.
That makes a difference.
That makes a difference. Did you ring, miss?
You needn't be so formal when we're alone.
Shouldn't that rather increase a butler's formality?
But you're not a butler.
I'm sorry.
In this, the final confrontation between Cornelia and Godfrey, we notice his position is one of, and look at the screen here, see his pose, see the way he looks at her. He is the soul of tact and of unassailability, totally protected in his guise as butler from anything that she might suggest. And she is once again, as she had done in the cocktail lounge, attempting by threat and flirtatiousness to lure him into yet another assignation, this one driving slowly out Van Cortlandt way.
Never been a breath of scandal connected with the family.
And as Irene enters, overhearing what she seems to think is an attempted seduction again by her sister, she fails to notice how utterly unflummoxed Godfrey is by these attacks, the demonstration again of the wiles and guile of Cornelia.
This one or that one?
And instead, the scene is tripped by Cornelia's parting line in which she says,
The traffic's almost as heavy as it is at the Grand Central Station. Don't forget, darling, 15 minutes.
We should keep in mind that by this moment, Godfrey as butler is effectively history. And so what happens in the next few minutes is important not to understanding Godfrey's ability to continue to play that role, but rather to our understanding of the relationship between Irene and Godfrey. Irene, thinking that her long campaign to win Godfrey is about to be lost to her ever-competitive sister, and she can't bear that to happen, seeks to manipulate Godfrey in using one of her principal weapons, the one that she had demonstrated so effectively earlier in this film, and she faints into his arms. Godfrey responds, meanwhile, as any gentleman would. He carries her to her bedroom in the hope that he can revive her. Unfortunately, this is a response that would be deemed unacceptable by the Hayes office censors, a response that could not be had by any gentleman who has not already declared his intention to marry the woman with whom he has had such intimate physical contact. So Godfrey's crossed over that line. You should note, however, that Godfrey remains completely taken in by Miss Irene until the moment that he sees her observing him in her vanity table mirror. What happens next is the key moment for the relationship, at least in Irene's eyes, which immediately reverses the roles that these two have played through most of the film. Remember, Irene has been supplicant. Godfrey, again, in this context, I suppose we could argue, the unassailable. Now, as Godfrey responds to the irritation of the moment and almost gleefully puts Irene in the shower, she realizes that as she proclaims momentarily to her mother, Godfrey put me in the shower. He loves me. She has managed to make him mad, and that is a critical moment. It is the moment when Godfrey can move from protege to some other kind of relationship. And that's the other thing that we want to note here. Finally, we can seek to define the term protege in a way that can make some sense, not only to the audiences of the 30s, but also to us. It's not lover. It's actually a relationship that imposes a comfortable distance between the protege and the sponsor. That distance has now been broken irrevocably by Godfrey, and that's a critical moment in the passage of this film. Having solved the romantic problem, although Godfrey remains, at least for this moment, blissfully unaware of that solution, there remains the lesson. Throughout this film, running side by side with the antics and insane dialogue of the Screwball, has been another far grimmer story. On several occasions, Alexander Bullock has complained about finances, has called himself a forgotten man, and has really established the only rational connection anyone makes in this film with Godfrey. Now, in this scene, he has arrived home really distraught by money, 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 the Frankenstein monster, which Carlo had articulated earlier in the film. In one strange way, the fact that Alexander Bullock has lost all his money now allows him to be liberated enough to remove Carlo from the presence of the Bullock household.
You don't mind if we have a little chat, Carlo, old boy?
In this brief moment, which is something probably that audiences have been waiting for as much as has Alexander Bullock, as he says, "Someday I'm going gorilla hunting and I won't miss." Well, he didn't. And the former middleweight champion is able to dismiss Carlo quite quickly. Now he must explain to the family what has happened. And I would call your attention, by the way, to Godfrey, who you see for the first time, having resigned and been fired as butler, dressed in civilian clothes, and asked to remain, as Alexander Bullock confesses to his loss of his funds that supported the family, and indeed to his embezzlement of the funds of the shareholders of the Bullock Enterprises. He expects to go to jail, but it'll be the first peace he's had in 20 years, he exclaims. Even Angelica looks chagrined.
What are we going to do?
Then Godfrey delivers a heartfelt speech, accompanied by the gift of the Bullock Enterprises back to Mr. Bullock. Let's listen to this for a moment.
I offered to help you once, but you declined that help, so I took the liberty of dabbling in the market on my own account. Here, sir.
What's this?
That's most of your stock. I knew it was being dumped on the market, so I sold short.
I don't understand. You sold shorts. You mean gentlemen's underwear?
Wait a minute. You mean that you've been making money while I was losing it?
I did it in your interest, sir. The stock has been endorsed over to you.
I don't understand. You did this for me?
Well, sir, there comes a turning point in every man's life. A time when...
And that's precisely the issue here. What Godfrey has recognized and now been able to convey to the Bullock family, as he will continue to in the course of this scene, is that turning point. That moment when courage, integrity, honor, and compassion lead him to take the actions that he has here. That moment that is infused with the same noblesse oblige that Ballinger of the Second National had demonstrated for his subscribers, is one of the critical points in this film because it demonstrates to the Bullock family, and therefore establishes, a new kind of character for them.
I put the pearls under Godfrey's mattress.
Thank you, Miss Cornelia. I wanted you to say that.
But why? You wouldn't understand.
Alexander Bullock is particularly brilliant in this scene, as of course is Godfrey, but most of all we should note the performance of Cornelia, her contrition, and even her despair. This is the moment in which Godfrey, in some other film, might have made that bond with Cornelia. Instead, this Godfrey has simply helped her to reclaim her life as he has for Mr. Bullock. That is his gift, and it carries the theme of community help, of reaching out to others as you would expect them to do for you, of carrying the irony with which the phrase "forgotten man" is so freighted to its logical conclusion. Not only will Godfrey be remembered, whatever his identity, but he has made it possible for the Bullocks to make something of their lives. That rippled curtain marks the departure of Godfrey from the Bullocks' employ. But what about Irene? Because, of course, she was not present during this particular moment of denouement. And now here's Godfrey, who, of course, had left his hat and coat by the door, but the changed Molly is so reluctant to see him go. You should contrast this in, again, one of several elements of circularity in this film with her pose in the opening moments of Godfrey's entrance into the kitchen in his butler outfit back at the beginning.
Goodbye.
But there is unfinished business here. That's why Irene wasn't in the drawing room when everything was settled up. Recall the scene that preceded that denouement. Godfrey put Irene in the shower. Only she and her mother had identified the significance of that act. Now Irene intends to consummate the progression that had been continued there. Yes, Irene is a character drawn with far broader strokes than many of her comedic peers. As Elizabeth Kendall has suggested in her book Runaway Bride, Lombard plays Irene almost as a female Keaton or Chaplin, with exaggeration of mood, of gesture, and, because this is a talkie, with language. Her breathless stream of consciousness looping and loopy dialogue. This role crystallizes Lombard's genius by allowing her natural athleticism and easy personality to connect with a role that demanded its inhabitor to let go of common sense. As La Cava shows us, this characterization was the perfect match for the dignified, rational man who Powell gives us as Godfrey. That man has managed to create a solution that extends beyond his benefactors, the Bullocks, to the larger community of forgotten men. And so we see Godfrey's idea, his enterprise. It's a nightclub named, appropriately, The Dump. It's built on the remains of the real dump, and now we understand the true significance of the opening titles, because now there is neon here, too. The waterfront houses yet another watering hole for the rich, but this one has a difference about it. Here, the forgotten men have jobs, a future, and all because of the tendencies of the rich. Again, circularity. And so my man Godfrey achieves a kind of social significance. The poor, the hopeless, are working again. Does it matter whether Godfrey was down on his luck simply because he was in a terrible love affair? To some critics of the day, yes. But I suggest that we look at the contrast between even the socially conscious rich man, Tommy Gray, and Godfrey. One remains good-naturedly oblivious. The other has learned to be socially conscious. What, of course, he also has learned, as he tells Tommy, is that Godfrey had felt that foolish feeling coming on again. In other words, he was indeed falling in love with Irene. This comment sets the stage for her imminent arrival and for the breathless moments that follow it. What we are left to consider is whether or not this ultimate conclusion is actually penultimate, or whether it is logical and appropriate, or, finally, as some critics have suggested, whether it actually is La Cava's final joke, a satirization of the happy ending syndrome that one associates with Hollywood. And that could be why the Academy denied this film any awards in the end. As I had suggested earlier, there is a reason here. But as a romantic, I have to conclude that Godfrey and Irene are meant to be. There are too many clues to avoid reaching that conclusion, in my opinion. He has been captivated by her from the start. He clearly is amused by her, and she clearly is in love with him. Finally, there's the inescapable logic of the screwball comedy. Come back now that social significance is acquitted to claim its own. Rational man always loses to screwball. What La Cava has given us here also is the most unexpected role reversal of all. Irene takes over. We had seen a hint of her manipulation. Now she realizes her dream, even creating a version of the fate Cornelia had predicted for her. Marry the butler and live in the ash pile. In these final moments, in order to achieve that end, she even manages to use Godfrey's own sense of propriety against him. We both know what happened, Irene says. You're my responsibility, Irene says. And then, in the ultimate application of Irene's loopy and looping dialogue, there's no sense in struggling against a thing when it's got you. It's got you, and that's all there is to it. This is a perfect application of Irene's logic, wacky but accurate.
I bought some wood and I bought some food. It should last us for a week anyway.
It's wonder you didn't have the foresight to bring a minister and a license.
It's funny, I never thought of that.
May I come in?
Oh, Mr. Courtney.
And so audiences got the best of both worlds. They saw how people might act if given a chance, even rich people. And in the end, they will also get their escapist fantasy, as this beautiful crazy person marries her butler. So stand still, Godfrey. It'll all be over in a minute.
Well, I guess we better have a witness.
Oh, we can use Clarence. Clarence, you can be the witness. Come down here. Come right, stand right down here. That's fine, right there. Just come on, Godfrey. Right there.
Well, now, join hands, please. No, the right hand.
Oh. Stand still, Godfrey. It'll all be over in a minute.